of the day is Deanna Lee from Western Washington University. She's going to be talking about deterring birds and blueberries, testing 3 potential techniques. So let's welcome Deanna. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I am a student at Western, and I've been working with Karen Steensma for the past 2 seasons looking at bird damage in 4 different crops, but today's presentation will focus on blueberries. So I'll talk a little bit about our project and our study site. Then we have 3 methods that we did trials with this season in blueberries, just this past season. Some different deterrent sprays, and then falconry and hawk kites, and then we'll move on and we'll talk about a couple things we tried in other crops, specifically looking at American kestrels and air dancers. So we'll start with the background and study sites. So this is a nationwide project. It's funded by the USDA, and we work in 3 different regions, the Pacific Northwest, and then Michigan and New York. We're working with Michigan State University and Cornell. In the Pacific Northwest, we actually have also branched into British Columbia and Oregon, so most of our sites are Washington, but this year we added some British Columbia sites, some cherries in the Okanagan, as well as some blueberry sites in the Fraser Valley. So looking at blueberries, I'll just talk you through how we look and determine whether there's been bird damage on a blueberry plant. So we go into a block and we randomly select about 60 plants in the block, and then of those plants we select a random branch on each plant, and we mark it with a little twist tie, which may be hard to see in this picture. Then we count all of the berries on that plant, and at this point we're still about 3 weeks before harvest, so the fruit is pretty green at this point. Then we come back, hopefully the day before the first harvest, or as close to the first harvest as we can, and we count the berries again. We make note of any berries that are present that are damaged by birds, and then we assume that any berries missing at this point were eaten by birds. So here's our results from 2012 in each of the 4 crops that we looked at, and this is just the Pacific Northwest data. So you can see blueberries there was almost exactly an average of 5% in, I think that was about 24 blocks that we worked in. All right, so let's look more specifically at some of the deterrent methods. We looked at methylantranolate, which is a naturally occurring compound in Concord grapes. It gives them that really pungent smell. So this is a really interesting product. You can smell it when it smells like grape juice. It's kind of funny. And it is registered under the name avian control, or you may have heard of other registered names. Bird Shield is one. Rejexit is another registered name. And then we also looked at a concentration of sucrose, so that's just basic table sugar, not registered as used for a pesticide. And we just diluted that 10 pounds to 100 gallons of water and sprayed it on the plants. Methylantranolate also is a spray. So for our trial, we had 3 different fields that we worked in, and we would select a number of rows. This only shows 1 row getting each treatment, but it was multiple rows, and we just tried to make sure we left a buffer of about 30 meters between the different treatments. So we'd spray the entire row and then conduct our damage assessments as I already explained. So from the 3 trials that we did this year, these are the results. And we really didn't see any significant difference at all whatsoever. Control, methylantranolate, and sucrose all had very similar levels of damage. So that was really interesting. And in fact, this trial was also done by our team in Michigan. And these are their results. And they did it in 3 fields as well, same exact methods that we used. And again, they really didn't see any interesting trends. This chart is a little bit different than the last one. It's split by fields, so this is their first trial, second trial, third trial. And they did work in one block that had very high damage across the board, this first block. And they told me that this block was a very young planting that just had really, really high bird damage. There was no bird control besides what they used for their trial. So we really did not find any interesting trends here. This chart is also from that trial that Michigan did, and it's looking at the presence of birds. And so they did some bird observations, and this just indicates the number of birds they saw in each treatment area. And as you can see, again, there's really not a lot of significant trends or any really interesting data that we can pull out of this. All right, so that was our sprays. We'll talk a little bit now about the falconry and the hawk kites. So in 2012, we did a pilot study looking at falconry in Skagit County, and we basically compared blocks of blueberries that had falconry to blocks of blueberries that did not, and we saw a significant difference in the amount of crop loss. So this graph shows the amount of crop remaining, and we saw a lot more remaining crop in the falconry fields than we did in the control fields. And so that was really great, and we decided to pursue falconry a bit further this year. And we also wanted to compare it to some other more cost-effective, possibly deterrent techniques. So we looked at these hawk kites that are produced by a company called Jack Kite, and it's just a kite that's on a fishing line, and it's attached to a pole planted in the ground. And when the wind blows, it catches the wind and it flies over the field, and it looks pretty realistic. In fact, every time we put a kite up this year, we would immediately have swallows come in and start trying to chase our kite away, which didn't really work because the kite was stuck on a string. But part of this idea was that falconry is very expensive, and so for a small grower who maybe couldn't afford that service, might be able to use something else that mimics a falcon. So our data from this study, we tested this in 4 different replicates, and we had a control compared to falconry, compared to kites, compared to a combination of falconry and kites. And our results were definitely not at all what we were expecting to see. We saw the lowest amount of damage in our control blocks, and we saw the highest amount of damage in the locations where we combined the use of falconry and kites. Probably the reason that we saw these trends is because bird pressure is just so variable across different areas, and we had a hard time finding control sites because nobody wants to do nothing to control for birds. And so the fields that we did have for a control probably didn't have much bird pressure to begin with, and so they were just naturally not going to have a lot of bird damage. The falconry levels of damage were a bit higher than what we saw in 2012 in our pilot study, but that could just be a variability from year to year. Why the kites were looking like they had the highest damage, we don't know, and we hope that we can do some further trials next year and really piece this apart, maybe look at our design and get some better ideas of what's going on. So that is all that we did in blueberries this year, but I want to talk a little bit about some things we did in other crops. In cherries, we looked at American kestrel nest boxes, which the kestrel is the smallest falcon in North America, and it's territorial during its nesting season, so it will chase away other birds. And they're cavity nesters, which is great because it means they'll inhabit nest boxes. So we compared in cherries some basically, we looked at a 1-acre plot around a nest box, and we compared occupied nest boxes to unoccupied nest boxes, leaving a buffer zone in between. And we were excited to find that on average there was a higher damage in those plots that did not have kestrels. So this seems to indicate that kestrels can be beneficial at least in the sweet cherries. We did not get a significant difference in the statistics, but the trial size was pretty low, so we're definitely going to be exploring this more next year, and we're going to be doing some more looking at bird abundance and see if there's any difference there, and hoping to flush this out a little bit more. And then the final thing I'll talk about is air dancers. So you can see from the picture there, this is the same thing that you see when you're driving down the highway and Jiffy Lube wants you to get an oil change. So we've been calling them air dancers, and basically the idea is that they fluctuate a lot and provide a visual scary factor that might frighten birds away. The cost per setup is only about $325, but the caveat to this is that if you don't have electricity in your field, you would have to run them on a generator, and that can get pretty costly to pay for that. We did not test these in the Pacific Northwest this year, but in Michigan and in New York, they did some pilot studies and had very positive results. So we're excited about that, and we're going to be doing some trials of that here next year. Hopefully finding out whether they really do make a difference. I think in this picture it's in a block of cherries, and I actually think that cherries might not be a great crop for this because the air dancer is below the trees, but blueberries might be potentially a good opportunity because they're a lot shorter, and so it'll be elevated above the block and provide a little more of a scary factor. So that's all that I have to share with you about our results today. Would definitely like to thank my field research team for all of their work this summer, and then all of the many growers and cooperators on the project, advisors. This list grows longer every year, so it's fun trying to squish them all into one page. But thank you so much for letting us work with you. We really appreciate it and look forward to continued cooperation. I also am supposed to mention that we have a poster up at the poster session, so if you totally zoned out on this whole presentation and you want to learn more about what we've been doing, you can check out that poster, and it'll also tell you about some of the things we've done in other crops. So please do check that out. All right, any questions?
Any questions for Deanna? Come on, it's got to be one. Daryl. No? No? Huh? Okay. Thank you very much.
All right, I got Daryl's stamp of approval.